Yes, it is both a secular style government with very heavy theocratic influence.
Would you say different religions form our government, and that's what stands out in our countries?
Our country was founded under Judeo-Christian principles. There's no question about that. The fact that there are other religions, such as Islam, is just a fact of life. But our country was established on Judeo-Christian principles, and we have never had any kind of influence by Islam as to form our own government.
Got you. I was also thinking, with the Christian wars and when the Catholics, I believe, met the Muslims at one point, they had a battle or some sort.
You're thinking about the Battle of Tours in France, where Saladin met, I can't think of the name of the French leader at the time. I just can't remember it right off the top of my head. Where the Muslims were actually defeated. Now, if you're going back further to the Crusades, those were battles or wars fought either at the behest of the Pope or the Bishop of Rome, or the desire for certain people to just go over there and commit wholesale theft.
8th century Europe was a convoluted place. It had only been a few hundred years since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In that collapse, northern tribes took former provinces for themselves. Vikings raided from Scandinavia, invading Britain, and in the Middle East, an entirely new religion was born in the deserts of Arabia: Islam. In the 7th century, Muhammad led his armies to spread this new faith. In the next decades, Islam swept over the entire region. In just a century after the founding of Islam, 2/3 of the Christian world fell. These new Muslims saw Europe as an easy target. In an ever-growing quest to expand their religion and influence, Muslims set sights on the rest of the continent. In the 730s, Islamic forces invaded from Spain into France in what they believed would be an easy victory. But to their surprise, they were met with fierce resistance by Charles the Hammer at the Battle of Tours in 732. I know this is a lot of terms. Surprisingly, Christians won the battle. The Muslims were defeated and fled, and never would Islamic armies travel so far into Europe again. Hooray for France! But it spurs a question. What if this battle had been lost? To some historians, it might have meant the end of Christianity in Western Europe. Wow, you say? That's quite high stakes. And many others say, that's too high of stakes. Well, that's what I'm going to explore. What if in an alternate timeline, the Muslims had won at the Battle of Tours, defeated the Christians, and left the Franks vulnerable? But first, some context. It's the 700s. Modern-day France, known as Francia at the time, was under the control of the Frankish kingdom. See the name connection? The Frankish kingdom was the growing dominant power in Western Europe. Its ruler was Charles Martel. Now, I didn't say King Charles because he wasn't a king. Martel was a prince. But in this time, peace and stabilization wasn't really a thing. Infighting, raids, wars between nobles were common and would stay common until the Renaissance. This unstable environment meant everyone was too busy fighting each other to mount an attack against an Islamic invasion. It would take a holy decree to do that a few centuries later. By 732, the Umayyad Caliphate had controlled the Iberian Peninsula for 20 years. The Franks saw that they were next, and began preparing for the next Muslim invasion. Long story short, that attack came as the Moors, Spanish Muslims from Spain, invaded up into the center of France. Martel and the Moors clashed in what became known as the Battle of Tours. Long story short again, the Franks did some sneaking behind enemy lines, the Muslim general is stabbed to death in the confusion, and the Muslims retreated back to Spain. Charles Martel is nicknamed the Hammer for his brute effectiveness against the invaders. Now, what if in this alternate timeline, this doesn't work so well, and the Franks lose the battle. What would have happened? Would Europe be up to Muslim invasion? In this alternate timeline, the Franks are absolutely slaughtered. Charles himself is killed as Umayyad troops overrun his men. In our timeline, this was a very real possibility that was narrowly avoided. The likelihood of a defeat like this happening is unlikely, but stay with me. If this did happen, this has massive ramifications. But don't go thinking Europe would be Islamic just yet, Jimmy. Had Charles Martel lost the battle, Islam wouldn't have dominated Europe, even though that is a common conception. Muslims in this alternate timeline invade into southern France and do some damage, but they're never able to hold onto this territory. Had the battle been lost, it still would have transformed what we think of as Western Europe, but not in a religious way. The Roman Empire was the largest empire ever seen on the continent, but it struggled to invade German lands and even hold back Germanic tribes. The Carolingian Empire, who I'll talk about later, waged decade-long wars against the Saxons and Slavs to spread Christianity. If it was so difficult for these two powers to win a war in Central Europe, then it's out of the question for a caliphate to spread Islam after winning one victory with an invasion force. In our timeline, ethnic tensions between Berbers, North Africans, and Arabs led to destabilization in Iberia. Also, not to mention the caliphate fell into complete civil war. You ask, if Muslims couldn't hold Europe, then what would change if Europeans lost at the Battle of Tours? Well, I say, this is a recurring gag, I should probably stop doing it. What would change is the entire history of Western Europe. Why? Politics! If you've watched Game of Thrones, you would know that one king's death has drastic consequences on history. Same for real life too. If Charles lost at the Battle of Tours, he would have been killed in combat. What does this affect? Everything. In our timeline, after Charles defeated the Muslims at Tours, he did two very significant things. One, to grow his ever-expanding military and kingdom, he needed support from nobles, and to get that new land, he created a relationship between the nobility and the crown. To sum it all up, this relationship set the stage and basically created feudalism. Two, he went on to have two sons, one of which became king of the Franks, Pepin the Short. Pepin continued his father's war against the Muslims, aiding the Christian Iberians. Alongside him in these wars was his son, Charlemagne. Now some of you are probably thinking, why is Charlemagne important? Charlemagne has been considered the father of Europe. From his coronation, the kingdom of the Franks became the Carolingian Empire. His rule was deemed righteous by the Pope, and he created a dynasty which ruled pretty much all of Western Europe, except England, Spain, and southern Italy. Both the former German and French empires saw themselves as descendants from Charlemagne. The true extent of what Charlemagne did is too much for a 5-minute video, but to sum it up, his military campaign spread Christianity to the Saxons. His reforms laid the groundwork for most dynasties for millennia. In this alternate timeline, without Charlemagne, the history of Western Europe just butterflies away. There is no Carolingian Renaissance, an era of art and faith, and so Europe remains more tribal and uneducated longer into the Middle Ages. In this alternate timeline, had the Christians lost at this one battle, Western Europe would have lost Charles Martel and his grandson, Charlemagne. Islam probably would have remained an influential force in Spain, as the strong powers of the Franks and Carolingians don't weaken it. With a devastating loss at Tours, the Muslims would have quite an advantage over the Christians, but never to an extent to destroy Christianity in Europe, only to secure the holdings they had already, and maybe raid a little bit. This shows, however, how everything in history is connected. As more time passes, one battle or change in leadership can over centuries mean whole alternate dynasties. So that leads to one more question. What do you think would have happened had the Christians lost at the Battle of Tours?
Your city is full of women and children. If my army will die, so will your city.
You offer terms, I ask none.
I will give every soul safe conduct to Christian lands. Every soul. The women, the children, the old, and all your knights and soldiers, and your queen. Your king, such as he is, I leave to you, and what God will make of him. No one will be harmed. I swear to God.
The Christians butchered every Muslim within the walls when they took this city.
I am not those men. I am Salahuddin. Salahuddin.
Then under these terms, I surrender Jerusalem.
Assalamu alaikum.
And peace be with you.
The great Saladin has showed Christians from time and time again that hate-mongering and arrogance will be their own destruction. Islam is not the problem. Raising your children to go on blood crusades is the problem. May God bless the world, not just America. Thank you.